Hello, it's Mike again. I've got a thing to read to you this time. A prediction. At some point, we're going to come out of this pandemic. Despite the government's best efforts to mess it up literally every aspect, there will be somewhere considerably north of 100,000 excess deaths at the end of it. There will not be a public inquiry. The government will frame the death toll as a failure of the NHS, a betrayal of the trust we all put in this beloved institution. They will say that the pandemic has exposed structural weaknesses in the NHS and such a catastrophe must never be allowed to happen again. And they'll use that as an excuse to dismantle the whole thing. They'll say it's clear the NHS's failure was a result of its monolithic nature and that only dispersal of its various components to the private sector will address these failings. The Telegraph is already pushing this line. It's a double win for the Tories. They dodge responsibility for their incoherent, incompetent response to the pandemic and get to dismantle this dangerously socialist institution that they hate with a passion. Of course, if the government does blame the NHS, it will be a complete lie, but what's new about that? The Conservatives themselves knew very clearly that a pandemic crisis would wreck the NHS. They performed Operation Cygnus in 2016, which is a model to find out what would happen. And the verdict was very clear. It was that the NHS would not be able to cope and would collapse. So they knew. And what did they do? They defunded it. They de-resourced it even more. They sold off our supply of personal protective equipment, which meant presumably that early last year they had to look for new sources of it and buy it back at extremely high cost because the PPE would have been in much greater demand then. So that was lunatic to start off with. They never bothered to buy ventilators. When the extent of the crisis became known, they didn't close the borders. So more people with the virus came into the country. They used the procurement system, which was nothing to do with the National Health Service, by the way. It was entirely managed by the Conservatives. They put in emergency procedures and used those emergency procedures to subsidise their spoilt friends, rather than bringing in anything that was actually useful. And then, of course, now we have the vaccine, which is being messed around like nobody's business, so people don't know if they're getting a first dose and when they're getting a second dose. This is the sort of lunacy that is going on at the hands of the Conservatives, and then they will say that the NHS is to blame for it. Don't let them get away with it. It's not the NHS, it's Boris Johnson, it's Matt Hancock, it's the Conservatives. They need to be reminded of their failures at every point. Thanks a lot. Bye.